Welcome back to Innovate Africa. You know what we're all about, right? Innovate Africa is about storytelling, telling the stories of businesses that are innovative and they impact lives on the African continent. But we don't only talk to those innovative businesses, we talk to the people who support them. That's important because these businesses wouldn't be able to achieve what they do if they didn't get the right support. Now, when you talk about support traditionally, you think about traditional VCs. But what about corporates? What about corporate venturing? And that is what we're going to be digging into today. Some people get a little scared when I mention that because corporates, especially when they're big, they've got loads of policies, loads of things to make sure that things run smoothly. Whereas when you a startup, high growth startup, or even a scale up, it's all about being nimble. It's all about keeping things lean and getting things done quickly. So there's no better person to talk to you about this than the man behind a business called NEXT176. You'll find out more about it. He's the Managing Director of NEXT176. Vuyo Mpako, what a pleasure, sir. Great having you on the show.
Pleasure's all mine, Kino. Thanks for making time for me.
Anytime, anytime. So I think the obvious question is NEXT176. Why exactly do you exist? Obviously, it's part of Old Mutual Group. I remember when Old Mutual, we had a meeting with Old Mutual's group chief executive. He said, oh, we're starting something that's going to be really innovative. It's called NEXT176. We had no idea what it was all about. Now we do know, and this is why I want to let more people find out about it. But here you've got a business that is responsible for backing, for scaling, for supporting innovative businesses. But you're doing this within the context of a 180-year-old organization, which is Old Mutual Group. So let's talk about NEXT176. Why do you exist? Why was it started?
You know, it's an absolutely fascinating story. Just under 4 years or so ago, Old Mutual turned 176 years.
Yeah.
So it's got this rich heritage of being able to be part of South Africa, but also the African continent's growth trajectory for just under 2 centuries now. But the real question that the group executive and the board were asking themselves is, hey, we can see growth in the next 3-5 years. It's going to be really part of kind of how the macros in each of the different markets we're operating in are. But where will growth come from further than the next 5 to 10 years? So what are the deliberate steps we need to take now in order to actually safeguard our business, to have opportunities that kind of give us optionality to find growth further than the next 5 or 10 years, as most businesses kind of run their business. They focus core on their core, but really it was how do we find opportunities for growth outside of our core businesses in areas that we believe could be our core businesses in the future. And so when you think about that, we were 176 years old when we started. The name NEXT176 comes from that.
So what does the next 176 years look like almost?
Absolutely.
So what does that mean to you as a team, though? Because it's one thing to have a brand.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a brand called XY Innovate, or whatever you want to call it. But a brand is more than a brand, right? It's almost a clarion call for the people who represent that brand to achieve a particular purpose.
Yeah.
So what exactly does NEXT176 mean to you and the team in particular?
It's fundamentally saying, how do we find opportunities that are going to be sustainable businesses for growth for the Old Mutual Group in time? That's been really, really fundamental for us. It's not about just deploying capital or backing startups, but it's really about actually finding opportunities that we think are going to be sustainable and disruptive businesses. Certainly businesses that are going to disrupt how we work today. So that's been fundamental and core to us. It's also been fundamental and core to us to think about tech-driven, because we think about scale. And today you can't think about scale without technology as a fundamental underpin of that. But also, we further said, listen, the biggest mistake you can do in any of these corporate venturing units is to have this innovation agenda and mandate that is not constrained. So I said, let's constrain it. Let's constrain it by choosing the areas that we want to play in. So we're not thinking about backing anything that has tech. We're not thinking about backing any business or SME. What we are thinking about is businesses we believe are focusing on our key theses in education, health, jobs. How do we get out of debt? How do we help consumers protect their family's income? Tech-driven. And we believe that these are businesses that an Old Mutual has a right to win in and could be a key part of Old Mutual in the future.
You have in the past thrown a couple of numbers out there, like impacting X amount of lives on the African continent over a certain period. Share that with us. Is that still the case? Let's talk a little bit about the numbers, the big, hairy, audacious goal, as the cliche goes, when it comes to NEXT176.
Yeah, I mean, what's really fascinating with these things, Kino, is that in day zero, when you put up these bold, ambitious goals, many people will say it's not achievable. Yeah. It's, but you only in the tip of South Africa. There isn't even 1 billion lives in South Africa, But I thought it was bold. It was right and it was bold. Of course, we started off kind of setting up in our core, which was South Africa. But we always had the ambition that actually this is really Pan-African. This is a Pan-African story. There isn't 1 billion lives you're going to impact in South Africa only. There's 1 billion lives that you will and could impact on the African continent. And so we kind of in horizon one, if I could say, where the last 3.5 years were really about setting up, demonstrating our ability to actually build and run a really sustainable platform, build credibility. And I think we're kind of getting into the interesting phase now on actually how does the scale look like, where we're starting to get closer to what that billion looks like. And that's a very, very exciting journey to kind of see us making the transitions from a setup and kind of prove that this works, prove that you've got enough traction, prove that you can actually generate decent returns for the investor, prove that you can actually deploy capital properly, but you can also give the investors back their money.
Absolutely. Now, the one, and I'm one of those people, right? When we talk about corporate venturing, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, corporates are criticized for being slow when it comes to getting things done because they've got different levels of approval, you've got policies you've got to follow, then you juxtapose this with something which is nimble, fast. So how does one actually build, and what was your biggest challenge actually is my key question, when it comes to positioning a venture builder inside a group like Old Mutual? So what was the biggest challenge?
I think, sometimes we don't value experience, so I think the names have changed. We've been doing corporate venturing for a while.
Yeah.
Not within Old Mutual, my previous roles, I've always kind of been the guy playing at a little bit on the edge, trying to break things, trying to figure out how the core works, but also how the external world looks like. And I think for you to be able to do this thing and to be able to do it in a big corporate and do it properly and successfully, you need a little bit of credibility. You can't just rock up and say, actually, I want it like this and I want it different. And we've seen many of those. We've seen many of those globally, where you either have people from the core in the corporate, not appreciating the outside, or you have people coming from the outside, not appreciating, how the inside works. And I think you need to have empathy. I think you need to have empathy with, there's 35, 40,000 people who work at Old Mutual. Super smart people.
Yeah.
The rules of the game are very, very different. So if you're going to rock up and look at 35, 40,000 people and think they're all stupid, you're going to get it very, very wrong.
Exactly.
You're going to get it tremendously wrong.
Yeah.
There's a reason it works like that, and you have to appreciate that. But you also have to appreciate that there is a different world around the venturing space that has rules that work in a particular way.
Yeah.
And for you to be able to play in there, you need to be very, very clear about playing within those rules.
Yeah.
And so it's that delicate balance of actually what is it that is sacrosanct in the group, in the core business, that you cannot afford to mess up, but also what is sacrosanct in the ecosystem that you can't afford to mess up. So a key part of it was finding out what those things in the core group are, but what are those things in the ecosystem that are sacrosanct. And how do you build a platform that is able to balance these two?
And I would imagine that's your job, right? Because on the one hand, let's be honest, corporates, the way they're traditionally known, return on investment is almost a non-negotiable, right? Acceptable loss is not something that necessarily factors in the way that entrepreneurs factor it in, right? And it's finding that balance between speed, agility, making a difference, and then, of course, making sure that you, to some degree, understand and appease what the corporate beast needs.
Absolutely.
Is that your key job?
Absolutely. So every day I kind of, I'm going to use the word, it's, we all use it. I'm ambidextrous. So each and every day, I'm kind of sitting in the one world and, in the same hour, I'm sitting in a different world. Both of them are super, super critical and important, and you've got to appreciate those.
Yeah, I normally see it for you when you visit Innovation City, which is where NEXT176 is. The tie goes. So, I mean, do you normally wear a tie when you go to Old Mutual head office?
Indeed, so you have to go to your own investors and shareholders. You've got to go to the boards, so that's part of the cost there, But also there's a slightly different world that you also have to be in as well. So it's kind of every day vacillating between the two and being comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Being really, really comfortable with that,
I don't know about you, but I mean, obviously, when you work in financial services, etc., P&Ls are very important. Understanding the finances are very important. But what role does gut play? I mean, do you, as Vuyo Mpako, MD of NEXT176, sometimes sit down with a founder? You haven't seen any of the financials yet. You or Tremaine Monaghan, who we've interviewed before, your chief venture officer. Does gut play a role at all when you go, this is great, now we just need to go and interrogate the numbers around this and the sustainability?
Yeah, you've been given so much resources. You've got to have rigor. And rigor and being slow don't go hand in hand.
Exactly.
Rigor doesn't necessarily mean slow. But I can't pick up a conversation with someone on the street. I think I've got a gut that this is a great one, and tomorrow we've signed a check. No, it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't work like that. And so we've had to really professionalize how we think about investing. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's low. But actually, there's ways you can think about, understand the stage of the business, understand what you will be able to get from the business at the different stages, and being able to manage that. I think one of the biggest things we've been able to do very, very, very well is to convince our group that they need to look at NEXT176 as a portfolio, not the individual assets underneath. So think of NEXT176 as a portfolio and think about the returns of the portfolio at an overall aggregate level over time. Yeah. So that you don't have to have kind of the interference at the underlying individual assets.
Sure.
But when you do deploy capital to the individual assets underneath, you also have to have the rigor that's appropriate. Absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's low.
Yeah. And that kind of dovetails with what you said earlier. You need to understand both sides of that particular coin. Now, what about, I would imagine that a lot of the work you do seeks to find synergy with the adjacencies between the business you're investing in and the Old Mutual Group. Makes sense, right, when you look at those adjacencies. But would you ever invest in anything that doesn't make sense for Old Mutual Group itself, but it has great legs and, potentially in and of itself, partnering with other people could be a really great business, maybe even a unicorn?
So let me put this out first. There's quite a lot of chatter in the corporate venturing space around, are you financial or are you strategic? There's nothing more strategic than making money. So I think that's fundamental. I don't care how much Old Mutual loves the individual opportunity. If it's not making money, you're not going to get fired today. You are going to get fired soon. So the idea that actually we'll put money into things because they make money, they make sense for the group, but they might not be making money for the aggregate portfolio is just stupid.
Yeah, exactly right.
So I think, and this is I see many such programs, and we part of the global corporate venturing. We see many right across the globe.
Yeah.
And like you find a couple of youngsters. So what's your mandate? No, we're strategic. The group CTO, group CFO loves us because we give them. It's like that's really dangerous. Are you making money? Well, we don't really have to. I'm too old for that.
No, exactly. Story time. I love story time. So give me one business that you've invested in and it's pleasantly surprised you. You always knew it had potential, but it's actually pleasantly surprised you because it's maybe taken off a lot better than you thought. Do you have a business of that nature that you can make?
Absolutely. And when we're 3.5 years old, Kino, and so to even be talking about something that has exited in 3.5 years in the venturing space, that's quick.
Yep.
And one of those that I'm super, super excited about to share the story on is a business that we actually started as a proof of concept, as an idea, just over 3 years or so ago. And the thesis was, in the middle of COVID, when South Africans die, most South Africans die without a valid will. And the valid will is not even about the assets. It's about actually your last wishes, your testament. Where do you want to get buried?
Yeah.
Not how your assets are going to be distributed. It's really about where do you want to get buried? I live in the Western Cape right now. I grew up in the Eastern Cape. Where do I want to get buried when I die?
Yeah.
Not about my assets, And we said South Africans don't have that.
Yeah.
Can we imagine a world where we give South Africans opportunity to be able to sit at home,
right,
and do that in their own spare time, and pause the conversation when they need to go sleep and think about it and pick it up again? That's a business that we started in a partnership. We later acquired a business that was doing this called quickwill.co.za. And over the last 3.5 years, we've been able to take that business, give it access to distribution that only an Old Mutual can do. A great direct-to-consumer business that we actually white-labeled and put onto the Old Mutual platforms. It's on the Old Mutual website right now. When you go in there, looking for a will, you can draft your will in 15 minutes without talking to anyone.
Yeah.
And, hey, actually we get such valuable data, and we can also start having a conversation with you about financial services.
Absolutely.
So in 3.5 years, we started that business. An absolutely top class and amazing founder led it. And in 3.5 years, that business is now exited into the Old Mutual Group and integrated into all their distribution channels and actually set up for scale.
What about the converse? A business you've put money into, but you had a cut. And like one or two of the key lessons you've learned.
Always very, very difficult. Very, very, very emotional conversations, Kino. There's one that we said after 2 or 3 rounds of continuously extending runway, we had to make a tough call. To say, actually, are we putting good money to bed on this particular one? And the metrics are just not coming. And we had to say no. Tough lessons learned from that is, I think we got into the wrong company in the first place. Not the product or the company itself, but the structure. We hadn't thought about who sits on the cap table, the shareholding.
Yeah.
We hadn't thought about founders and founders' incentives appropriately. So there's quite a lot that we can pick up, not about the tech or the platform itself.
Yes.
But everything around the business.
So in wrapping up, I'll end off with a cliched question. And that cliched question is, all right, you're looking forward to the next 176, the next 200 years, but what does the next 3 to 5 years look like for you if you're putting one foot in front of the other?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier, we're getting into an interesting kind of Horizon 2 conversation for ourselves. As a team, we had our initial fund, super excited with the progress that we've done and actually what the return profiles look like, both realized and unrealized.
Yeah.
We think we've built a really credible platform, Krino, that I'm super, super proud of. I think it's a reputable platform that is actually, working alongside other well-known co-investors,
Yeah.
certainly on the African continent. I think the next phase for us is expanding a lot more outside of South Africa. And the next phase for us is actually really just doubling down and saying, actually, how much of a bigger ticket could we be looking at? And actually, should we not be looking at markets a lot more outside of South Africa than we have to date?
Maybe partnering with a Norscan 22 with their $200 million fund, maybe. Just throwing it out there.
What do you know?
You never know. But Vuyo Mpako, always a pleasure chatting to you. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Keno.
That, of course, is Innovate Africa. A leader who supports not only the ventures, but also the needs of the corporate. And this is essential in corporate venturing. It's one lesson I learned today. You can't go in like a bull in a china shop going, I'm doing it my way. It's like anything in life. You need to understand things from different perspectives. You need to get people on board. And together, you can go very far. I'll see you on Innovate Africa next week.